But I mean, it's not really hard to beat the S&P. The S&P is the average of the market. So what do
That's
you want to
true.
be? I always kind of want to be above average. Hello.
Hey, what is going on, guys? It is Kevin here, and I am back once more with a super important video for my pre-retirees and my retirees out there. Because in this video, we're going to be reacting to a clip from Dave Ramsey talking about that famous 8% safe withdrawal rate. But this time, we're going to model out in our software how sequence of returns risk can turn that portfolio completely upside down. Don't miss this one. Let's go.
This question comes from Thomas in Colorado. He says, I'm struggling to know how much we actually need to retire. I'm 54 and currently have 1.4 million in a 401k, which sounds like a lot to me, but I don't actually know how fast we'll burn through that. What's the best way to know how much I'll actually need? So I'm thinking about the goal. You don't want to burn through your nest egg, right? You want to have it invested in such a way that you're able to live off of the interest and not really touch the nest egg is what I would say.
Yeah, that is pretty accurate. Most retirees don't want to burn through their nest egg. However, I've worked with many retirees where the goal was to pretty much burn through that nest egg as there was nothing they wanted to pass on to anybody else, or there was nobody else to pass it on. Or maybe they just would prefer to spend down their assets, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So just a different school of thought there.
So that would be my first thought is I would use a calculator and kind of run this back and go, okay, what's the income that I think I'm going to need and get that number. And then, okay, what does the draw off of my interest need to be? What does my nest egg need to be so that my draw can equal that? So I'm kind of reverse engineering it in that way. And then there's also the part of this, you're 54. I'm thinking, okay, you've got 1.4 million now. There's a good chance that in 7 years it could double. And that ain't bad.
Yeah, if you've got it invested at 10% or better, it doubles every 7 years.
Yeah, 10% or better. Yep.
And so at 61, if you're invested in good mutual funds, you're going to have 2.8. And at 68, you're going to have $5.5 million.
Now there is inflation to play into that.
No, I'm not talking about inflation.
Just
inflation
actual
adjusted.
dollars.
I'm just saying that if you're making 10%, it doubles every 7 years. A lump sum does. That's if you're adding nothing to it. Okay, so at 68, that's what you would have if you don't touch this. Now, if you got to retirement and all you had was 1.4 million, then how would you calculate if that's enough? Just like Jade said, there's a couple of factors. There's inflation that you want to stay away from, and you need to look at your rate of return. So if you're invested in good growth stock mutual funds that are averaging what the stock market has averaged, the stock market has averaged 11.8% since it began, the Standard & Poor. Okay? So let's just pretend you're making 11%. We'll round down for the people that go bananas when I start talking about this stuff. All right, so we're going to round down. You're making 11%. All right, if you left 3 in there, so that it would grow a little bit to cover some inflation, and pulled off 8, that means you'd be living on $90,000 a year.
Okay, so the 11% number that Dave is talking about. So realistically, if you're going to use an all S&P 500 number, historically the number is actually closer to 10% if you're using the geometric mean, which is the actual mean you want to use, because that mean is going to factor in the up years and the down years. So it is more realistic. And again, that's a historical look at the S&P 500. We don't really know for sure, and it's actually pretty unlikely that the S&P 500 will return 10% going forward, even on a geometric mean basis. So you do have to keep that in mind, not to mention that this would be a 100% equity portfolio for a retiree or a pre-retiree. And again, if a bear market comes around, that could cause issues with sequence of returns risk and just the emotional risk of being all in equities with nothing in there to dampen the volatility if there is a bear market.
8% of 1.4, right?
With no debt?
Yeah. And so can you do that? That's the question. And if you can do that in today's dollars, you can do that in tomorrow's dollars, because if you leave this alone, because it will have grown that much more.
That's right.
All right. And so if you did that, the account is growing by 3% a year if it averages an 11% rate of return.
Also a good point. So you're still getting
so
more money.
So it never burns up. It runs in perpetuation. It's a perpetual motion machine.
And this is another...
So in theory, that would be correct. But like I said, the market does not go up and down. It doesn't go up in a perfect fashion, right? You're not getting that 10% every single year. Some years you're up 20%, some years you're flat, some years you're down 20%. So when you have that factored in there, taking out 8% can be really deadly to that portfolio because it may not be able to have any time to catch back up to where it was because you're also withdrawing from the principal balance. That's the main issue that the retirees can run into, and that really is what sequence of returns risk. The sequence of the market returns is the risk, hence the name, of course.
Good time to bring in why we think it's and teach that it's so important to be debt free with a paid for home at retirement, because
You don't
when
need
you
as
don't have
much
any
to live.
bills, you don't need as much money to live on.
Yeah. And then that keeps you from doing this. But let's say you start stepping on it, okay?
Mhm.
And you step on the principal $100,000 a year. Well,
You'll still be all right.
You got a 14-year burn rate.
Mm-hmm.
So from when are we going to start that? At 70, that takes you to 84.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to run out of money
Mhm.
if you look at your burn rate on your principal as well. So you're going to be fine. You've done a great job. Now the trick is, what I would suggest is we keep earning a living and leave this money alone, and let's let it double a couple more times before we start. Then you can pull off, $200,000 a year.
That's right.
I mean, you're sitting on $5 million instead of $1 million. It's a whole different equation, dude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, good growth stock mutual funds. We suggest. I split my personal 401k. Jade does too, among 4 types: growth and income, aggressive growth, and international. And over the last 30 years, my little portfolio of that has averaged over 12, most years over 13%.
Wow, Dave, that's great.
Okay, so if you're going to say your portfolio is returning 13%, you really got to name the specific fund so we can actually look and see if that's accurate. Otherwise, it's fluff to me. But, again, that is an extremely aggressive portfolio regardless. 3 of those funds' names had the word growth in them. So I'm assuming that's basically a 100% equity portfolio, or at least 95%. And again, the question is, can you take that much risk going into retirement if you have an 8% withdrawal rate? That's what we'll model out later in this video.
But I mean, it's not really hard to beat the S&P. The S&P is the average of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what do you want to be? I always kind of want to be above average. Hello, that's try to beat it a little bit. But you stay in that north of 10,
Mm-hmm.
and you draw in that 7 or 8 range.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to bump up and cover inflation as you go along.
Like I said, that works in theory, but not in reality, or even if we model it out, because of sequence of returns risk. And again, the S&P 500 is not average. It is quite literally the largest 500 companies in our US stock market. So they're definitely not average. They're the ones driving probably the most growth and the most innovation out of almost any of the companies, out of the thousands of companies in the US stock market. So saying it's average is really ridiculous. So again, this gets into like the actively managed versus the passively managed debate, which the data shows that those low-cost index funds, like things like the S&P 500 index funds, do really well and are a superior choice usually to their equivalent peers in the actively managed space.
Now, some of the wonky certified financial Pharisees types, they go bananas on that calculation. But here's the thing that I try to get people to remember is when we've done studies of people that win with retirement, none of them won with retirement because of some nuanced understanding of 12B1 fees
Mm-hmm.
or some discussion about 11.8 versus 12.3
Mm-hmm.
or 10.2. None of that caused them to retire well. What caused them to retire well is they actually put money in the freaking 401k.
Certified financial Pharisee? That is crazy. I don't think I've ever heard someone call somebody that term. That is crazy. So again, it's certified financial planner. Thank you very much, Dave. But I will say the one thing I agree with him there is the main thing here to focus on, instead of being so focused on the different investment returns, is how much you are contributing to these accounts and actually doing it on a systematic basis. So we can agree on that. Name calling aside, I think Dave is going to eat his own words here, and maybe if he earned his CFP designation, he'll find out why sequence of returns is not going to work in his portfolio. But again, I do like what he said there at the end.
There's a high correlation between people that have money and people that save money. Why is this hard?
That's so good, Dave.
It's not a bunch of freaking theory. You've got to do it. And oh my God, you nerds drive me bananas. But so yeah, it's good to be thoughtful about things, but sometimes you just got to do something. Just run up and knock the crap out of something.
Well, what if you're a person that's like, Dave, I just invest in my, my index funds.
That's fine.
I don't want to get into all this stuff. I just want to do my index funds.
That's fine. You're just average. You're just average.
Average returns.
You're a C student.
Not a C student.
Well, that's what average is, isn't it? You're not failing,
right.
But nobody's looking at your
you're
shining eyes.
You're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Yeah, you left some money out there. That's okay. I just want to beat it just because it's a game, I don't care.
Again, the S&P 500 definitely is not average. It is driving a lot of the innovation and growth in this stock market. And I would argue that you're leaving money on the table by being in high-fee, actively managed funds that are usually trailing, if not underperforming, their benchmark. So I would say it's completely opposite. You are leaving money on the table by going the other way. And I think Dave just needs to go look at the data on this a little bit closer, because when we look at it, we know that the S&P 500, those index funds, I think it's 95% are beating the actively managed funds. And when you consider fees, there's basically no funds that do it in the long term. So just something to consider and think about. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our software now and model out this caller's exact scenario and see if Dave is right. Can they withdraw 8% from their portfolio per year and not run out of money? Let's find out. All right, here we go. So we have Thomas Ramsey. This is the caller who called in. So here's a quick snapshot of their net worth and their investments. I'm going to break this down to show you guys what exactly this caller had and some of their details. And I really tried to make it as, as advantageous for the caller as I could, really. So I'm trying to put as many things in their favor to make this more fair and balanced for the caller here. So like we said, age 54, I have single, retirement age 65, life expectancy is 90. Breaking down their net worth, we have an emergency fund savings of $25,000 in cash. We have qualified retirement, so that's that 401k, $1.4 million. We have a completely paid off home of $300,000. So their net worth is $1.725 million. And again, this is all just as the call laid out, and if not even more favorable, because they have a paid off house. And they also have $1.4 million, and they still have quite a few years until retirement here. So it should be able to grow a little bit more. Income here, I have $70,000 for their income. And then the Social Security I have off right now because in our testing, I have a toggle to turn it on and show you guys what that looks like. And then for living expenses and taxes, I have current year living expenses are $50,000. And then for retirement, which starts at age 65, I have $90,000 per year, as Dave mentioned. And then federal taxes, state taxes, I put Colorado for the state taxes because I believe that's what the caller called in from. So I don't have any savings or contributions, anything like that. We can model that as well. But what we're trying to do here is isolate, if you have, a 10, 11% return and you draw 8%, is that realistically going to survive in a bear market? So that is Thomas Ramsey's portfolio and his profile. Let's go ahead and see if this can survive. All right, so we're gonna jump over to our decision center, and this is where we're gonna model out everything for you guys. So here is the lifetime portfolio value of Thomas based on where we're at right now, 2026, age 54. Here's retirement, this little sunset icon, and then obviously here's the rest of life. So this is what the assets would look like on a pure linear basis. So if the market, returns 10% every single year in a perfect sequence, this is what it would look like. And this is before inflation is considered. If you're wondering, well, what would that look like with inflation? Let's bump this up and you'll see the numbers come down quite a bit. And this is what we're gonna be using because this is gonna be an after inflation adjustment, of course. So as you can see right now, right about 1.5 million. At retirement, should have about 3.275 million. And again, this portfolio is using a 100% equity. I think it's at a 10.5% return per year, which is extremely aggressive. Now, if we jump over to the Monte Carlo summary, if you don't know what this says, hey, let's run 1,000 trials based on really good markets and then really bad markets going forward and everything in between. And let's say what percent of the time was it successful that you had enough money to run through your retirement? That is what this is showing us. So in this scenario, with no other adjustments made, there is an 81% probability of success. And you're probably thinking, well, that seems pretty high. And it is. That's a good number to have. The problem is it really shouldn't be that low. It should be near 90, 95, if not close to 100 based off these assets. The problem is that we're so dependent on if the market does well or not. And we haven't even applied a bear market yet. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead. We're going to do market changes here. So we got a few different things modeled out here. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to add in a severe bear market at retirement. This is our sequence of returns risk toggle. So instead of that perfect, glide path, linear path, let's see what happens if the market doesn't do so good right when you retire. And as you can see, you're now looking at a coin flip for retirement if a bear market comes by. And let's jump back to our portfolio value here. As you can see, it just gets absolutely tanked here. And again, these are the linear projections. So what I can show you guys is the different trials specifically from that Monte Carlo simulation. So if we do the average market, so the 50% trial, this actually shows you that exact trial. And this one here, as you can see, actually ran out of money. That's why their success rate on this is 47%. So if the 50% trial is going to run out of money. So again, that's dangerous. That is not good to see at all. And this is the perfect illustration of sequence of returns risk, is that when that bear market comes to town and you're withdrawing in that portfolio at such a high rate, the portfolio just doesn't have enough time to actually recover and you run out of money. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, if there was actually a bad bear market at retirement, I'm just going to reduce my living expenses and I'm going to be completely fine. Well, let's test that too. Let's jump back to the Monte Carlo summary. Let's reduce living expenses by $30,000. Guys, $30,000 is a lot of reduction, but let's do it as a stress test. Didn't make much of a difference. Now we're actually at a true coin flip here for the Monte Carlo simulation. That again is very bad to see. Jumping back to the portfolio value, as you can see at the 50 trial, you just barely scrape by with $75,000 assets left. So if this person ever wanted to pass anything on, you can pretty much forget about that. Now, the other big benefit we're giving Dave here is the fact that we're having the market return over 10% per year. With even a 100% equity portfolio, that is just so unlikely going forward and extremely aggressive. I'm going to bump that down to a 7.26%, which is actually the highest model portfolio that the software has, and it's nearly 100% equity. If we do that, let's go ahead and jump over to our Monte Carlo simulation, and it's probably not going to be too good. Yeah, 31%, guys. So using a realistic market return, reducing those living expenses by $30,000, and if that bear market comes to town, as you can see, a 31% return is just, or success is just not going to cut it for retirees nowadays. They're going to want a lot more reassurance than that. Now, just to be fair to Dave, even though he didn't mention this, and I've already proved my point here, let's go ahead and say that they start drawing Social Security at retirement to help alleviate that bear market and those portfolio withdrawals. And the Social Security is just based off the income, so it's a pretty accurate estimate of how much this person would get. And as you can see, guys, it's still basically a coin flip. And I can tell you, retirees do not want to retire on a coin flip. All right, you guys, that is all I have for today. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe. And if you are somebody who's interested in working with us here at Pira Wealth Management, there's a link in the description below. I would love to have a conversation with you. Again, thanks so much for watching and take care.